Hey everyone, Leslie Rice here, creator of The Signal and Terra Obscura with a few announcements. First off, I know everyone's hungry for the next full episode of The Signal, and it's certainly on the way. Thank you all for your patience, as my absence has largely been due to some unfortunate personal matters. That aside, our subreddit, r/signal horror fiction, is now up and running again. I'll be bringing back our monthly Best of contest, and now all winners and runners up will receive the offer to have their stories read as part of a monthly bonus episode for our Patreon contributors. Don't despair though, as selected stories will also be aired live during episodes of Twitch of the Death Nerd, our twitch.tv channel, which can be found under the name Signal_Obscura. Also, The Signal, Tainted Worlds, the new tabletop RPG based on our podcast, is currently in alpha testing and will be released soon. We're learning a lot with each new test of the system, and anyone interested in assisting us will receive a free copy to work with. And that brings us to our final announcement and the subject of today's release. Last year, I took on a project by a new author with some interesting ideas, Ian Q. Malcolm. Ian was kind enough to let me narrate his debut novel, The Draxler Program, the tale of a prison convict who takes a long shot at freedom only to find that his odds may have been better facing his term. With his generous permission, I am happy to bring you, over the next few days, the first 3 chapters of The Draxler Program, available right now in ebook format and in audiobook. These 3 chapters are on us, but you may want to go out and buy the rest of the audiobook. After all, what's the worst that could happen? Chapter 3. The ride from the hospital to our facility wasn't too far. I had hoped that the facility would be nicer than the bizarrely laid out office building I had previously met Inara at, but like so many of our hopes, this one was not met. Our facility, as I feared, turned out to be the same office building as before. Nothing says the government takes this program seriously, like locating the headquarters of a program in a 3-story office building that appears to be stuck in the 1960s. After we entered the building, Ivy and I were ushered up the stairs to the second floor. From what I saw, the second floor seemed to consist of a few larger offices, a break room, 2 bathrooms, and one large room I would later come to call our AA room. Though, to be honest, the nickname didn't really work that well when I thought about it. I mean, we were neither alcoholics nor anonymous. The nickname had more to do with the feeling the room gave me when I entered it. It was the AA room that turned out to be our destination. As we approached the door, our escort opened it and ushered us inside, Ivy first, cautiously followed by me. I wasn't about to let him walk behind me any time soon. "And here they are, just in the nick of time," a man said once we entered the room. He was seated among 3 other people, whose chairs were arranged in a circle. I figured the man who greeted us must be the psychologist in charge of our group therapy session. This was based on the fact that he was the nicest dressed person in the room, and he was also the only person who looked remotely pleased to be there. If I had to guess an age, then I would have put him in his early 40s, although he still had a full head of hair. Both his hair and his bushy goatee had a smidge of gray sneaking up into his otherwise ginger mane. "You must be Mr. Ivy and Mr. Rivers," he said as he walked across the room to introduce himself to us. "I'm Dr. Draxler. Please, come take a seat." His handshake was firm, but his skin felt surprisingly soft in my hand. It told me 2 things. He was confident in what he was doing, and he hadn't had to do physical labor in a while. Whether that was because he was too preoccupied with his work, or because he simply despised physical labor, I didn't know. I stored the detail in a mental file I would later use to build a more complete profile of the man. "As you are all more than aware by now, this is the Criminal Behavior Reform Program," Draxler continued. "Over the next 3 years, all 6 of us will be meeting in this room every other Tuesday to share with the group your struggles, successes, and anything else you feel is relevant to your personal and or joint experiences during your rehabilitation." For being a psychologist, Dr. Draxler was quite the talker. All of the psychologists I had met previously, which to be fair weren't many, were much quieter and seemed dead set on perpetuating their own stereotype. Draxler was different in this regard. He had an extra ring to his voice, like a Broadway actor. It felt as though he played up his words in order to listen to them later on tape and bask in the glory of his performance. As we have 3 years together, we're certainly not expecting any major breakthroughs today. The purpose of our meeting today is simply to get to know each other better. Afterward, you'll meet with your counselors to be given the details of your Year 1 tasks and to be shown your living quarters. Does anyone have any questions? The nervous silence that fell over the room as we looked around at each other reminded me of the few classes at Lewis and Clark College I snuck into during my year in Portland, Oregon. Regardless of the class, there would always be one student who would have to ask a question during these awkward silences, which would make everyone else in class think, "Shut the fuck up so we can move on." As I looked around at my program mates, I couldn't help but wonder if any of them would be that one annoying student. "Very well," Draxler said after a few seconds of silence. "I'll get the introduction started. As I said before, my name is Dr. Earl A. Draxler, and I've been a behavioral psychologist for the past 16 years. Besides being the founder and director of the Criminal Behavior Reform Program, I'm also a professor of psychology here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Who would like to introduce themselves next?" The heavy-set Asian woman across from me muttered something under her breath that I couldn't make out. "Screw it, I'll go." "Wonderful," Draxler said. "For the introductions, could you please share with us your name, where you're from, and the crime you're serving time for? If you want to say anything else on top of that, then you're more than welcome to do so." The Asian woman looked as though she had been trying to restrain herself from rolling her eyes. "So yeah, my name is Lindsay Pack." Part of me wanted to say, "Hi, Lindsay," to complete the AA feel, but no one else said a word, so I held my tongue as well. It's usually better to feel like an idiot on the inside than to open your mouth and have the people around you think you're one as well. I'm originally from Dayton, Ohio, but I've been living at the Ohio State Penitentiary in Youngstown for the past 7 years," Lindsay continued. "I was sentenced to prison on aggravated arson charges. Basically, I caught my husband cheating on me, and I thought it would be appropriate for both him and his little slut to burn in a fiery hell, so I followed him to her place and blessed their union by providing them with hell on earth." Although Lindsay's ex-husband and his mistress hadn't died in the fire, the hell on earth she provided them left them with a few burns. I took away one important lesson from her introduction. Don't cross her. Well, if I had to cross her, then I'd need to do it well enough to make sure it didn't come back to burn me. Pun intended. After her introduction, Dr. Draxler decided to make the introductions go in a clockwise order. This led to Danny Rizzo being next in line to introduce himself. He was a middle-aged man from the Bronx who had been serving time for Grand Theft Auto. Out of all of us, he had been serving the shortest sentence. Apparently, you only get 3 years for GTA. However, since this was his second stint for the same felony, he would get washed at the end of his sentence. The program was his only way of avoiding that fate. "I guess that makes me next," said Ivy after Rizzo finished. "My name is George Ivy, and I'm from Montgomery, Alabama. About 7 years ago, I was sent to the Kilby Correctional Facility for involuntary manslaughter. It ain't as bad as it sounds. I accidentally hit an old jungle bunny with my car. I couldn't see him. Honest." He looked at me when he said, "honest." It wasn't an apologetic glance. He wasn't upset that he had killed a black man. His glance only conveyed that it had not truly been an accident. "The old man was walking away from me, and that night was darker than a goth chick's panties. I ain't seen him till it was too late. I freely admit that I deserve some form of punishment for what I done, but the judge only threw the book at me because it was also my 4th DUI. I didn't know what about his talk disturbed me the most. His apparent lack of remorse for killing an old man with his car, the fact that he thought his punishment was overly harsh, or the idea of him having problems with alcohol abuse to go along with his roid rage. "I'm sorry to hear you believe the justice system failed you, George," Dr. Draxler said. "However, I'd like to encourage you to look on the bright side. If you take this program seriously, then not only will you get off with a more appropriate sentence in your eyes, but you'll have worked through the problems that put you in that position in the first place. In fact, that's a good thing for you all to reflect on as we move forward in this process." We all nodded and murmured our agreement. "I guess that leads us to you, Peter," Dr. Draxler said. "I guess that does," I said with a type of PR smile that would make Jack Torrance proud. "For those of you who don't know, my name is Peter Rivers, but I go by Pete. I guess you could say I grew up in Santa Monica, California, because I spent the first 14 years of my life there." Danny leaned forward in his chair. There was a gleam of recognition in his eyes that created the tiniest of knots in my stomach. "I ran away from home at 14 and have been up and down the West Coast a million times since then. The last place I lived prior to going to the high desert state prison was Eureka, California." "Hey," Danny said as he brought his hand down from his temple to point his finger at me, "you don't happen to be related to Ralph Rivers, do you? I remember hearing something years ago about his son going to prison." "Who the fuck is Ralph Rivers?" Ivy chimed. "You don't know Ralph Rivers?" Danny asked in a surprisingly high-pitched voice. "He was only one of the greatest TV and film directors of all time." Draxler let out a muffled cough that got everyone's attention. "I believe we're getting off track here. Please let Pete continue his introduction." "It's okay, Doc," I said, and then turned to address Danny. "Yes, Ralph Rivers was my father." "Holy shit, man," Danny said. "Your dad was a fucking genius." "Some people believed he was, but I'm not a part of that group. Anyways, going back to why I was sentenced, I used to be a confidence artist." "I thought they were called con artists," Lindsay said. I stifled a sigh. "Yes, the common term is con artist, but I personally don't like it. It has a negative connotation attached to it that leads people to think that I stole something. I prefer to use the full original name because I used my confidence to convince people to willingly give me lots of money. However, I bit off a little more than I could chew with my last job, and it led to me being caught." "And what job was that?" Draxler asked. I found his question to be remotely funny. Out of all the people in the room, he had to have known what I had done. It would have certainly been in my file, but I figured he wanted me to share it with the others. Back when the Rhine Corporation was looking for a second headquarters in the U.S., cities across the country were going crazy to convince them to put it in their city. I decided to take advantage of the craziness by pretending to be the person in charge of Rhine's new headquarters project. The list of cities that applied to be selected was publicly available on their website, and it was quite the long list. I simply scheduled meetings with the mayors of these cities and asked them what they could privately offer us on a personal level to build the headquarters in their city. Of the 20 mayors I talked to, 12 decided to pay a hefty figure to bring in the new headquarters, which resulted in me having $17 million sent to a Swiss bank account. I was about to board a direct flight from LAX to Casablanca when I was arrested. "So you're telling me that mayors from 12 different cities sent you millions of dollars without making sure you were actually a part of the company," Danny said. "How fucking stupid are these guys?" I'm sure they looked into the background information that I gave them, but I had the systems in place to pass most background checks, I said. "A lot of politicians aren't the brightest bulbs to begin with. Add to that the fact that I was able to distract them with the idea that a multi-billion-dollar corporation would bring 11,000 jobs to their city if they bribed me, and they were handing me money faster than you can imagine." "Thank you for sharing," Dr. Draxler said before any more questions could be asked. "Sarah, would you please introduce yourself to the rest of the group?" Sarah Fuchs sat across from me on the other side of Dr. Draxler. Based on her appearance, I would put her in her late 20s or early 30s, and objectively speaking, she was quite attractive. If her mugshot was leaked, then I'm sure it would inspire hundreds of idiotic memes that would state something like, "steals your heart and your wallet." However, stealing wasn't what had put her behind bars. That reward had been doled out for drug trafficking. Apparently, she had been in charge of running the drug scene in Montana and had even aided a Mexican cartel in getting drugs into Canada via Interstate 15. After she had finished her introduction, Dr. Draxler spoke up again. Thank you for sharing, Sarah, and thank you all again for your participation today. I know a 3-year journey might sound like a long time, but it will be over before you know it. Today you all took the all-important first step, and I commend you for it. Although we meet as a group every other week, I will see you all next week for one-on-one sessions. Now you are all to report to your respective counselors to pick up your first-year assignments, and then to be shown to your rooms. If you walk out the door you entered, then the guards will guide you to their offices. Thank you all again, and I'll see you next week. With his parting words still ringing in our ears, we all adjourned to the hallway where the guards were waiting for us. After we arranged ourselves in a single-file line, like kindergartners on our way to lunch, they led us downstairs to our counselor's offices. As Inara's office was the last in the hallway, I was the last one to get dropped off. Unlike my last visit to her office, she didn't greet me at the door. Instead, she sat behind her desk, beaming like a Cheshire cat when the guards let me into the room. "Thank you, boys," she said, "but I think I can handle it from here." "It's good," I had begun to say when she raised one finger to cut me off. We sat in silence for a few seconds as she cocked her head to the side to listen for something. I strained my ears, but I couldn't detect any unexpected noises. "We need to talk," she said as she carefully placed a small black contraption with a blinking red light in front of her. It took me a second to recognize the device, and with that recognition came the sudden understanding of what she had been listening for earlier. The thing on her desk was an audio jammer, and she had been listening to the guards' footsteps to ensure they were out of listening range. "I need you to remain calm, because there's a security camera over my left shoulder, and this little guy only kills the audio," she said as she gestured to the device in front of her with her eyes. "This program isn't what you think it is." Thank you for listening. Again, the Draxler program is currently available in ebook format and in audiobook. Thanks again for your support, and I'll see you next time on The Signal.